And welcome everybody to another amazing week right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider, and today's show we're going to be covering Beshear's State of the Commonwealth and budget address. Yes, it's a budget year, so the State of the Commonwealth and also the budget talk are all combined into one, and we're going to dig through. We're going to dig through what he said. I'm going to play some parts of what he said and offer kind of some commentary that I think is needed on the subject, because quite frankly, what you have to understand about what happened in that address is that it wasn't about Kentucky. It wasn't about actually accomplishing anything. It was political theater derived at one thing: Andy Beshear making sure that he can look as good as he possibly can while running for president. I know, it's unfortunate. He doesn't care if Kentucky goes bankrupt in the process, and that becomes pretty obvious when you look at some of the things he did talk about. So let's take a look. Let's dig down into that today. Before I do, though, if you're listening on the podcast version, I ask that you leave us a 5-star review. If you're listening to this on radio or TV, I just want to let you know you can head over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. You can check out any past episodes you missed, or if you can't catch all of this, then, well, maybe you want to hear about it. I don't know. But starting off, going into anytime I hear a budget address, it reminds me of this scene here from Parks and Rec.
Need to cut expenditures by 32%.
Let's make it an even 40.
Oh, that's not necessary.
Slash it. Slash it.
Because you know what? We just need to slash it. Slash it. Slash it. And if Kentucky need to slash it anytime, it is right now, and we'll dig down all through it. But I want to start off first by what I said earlier, when I said it is clear that this is about Beshear running for president. He makes sure he sends that message early on. This was very early on in the speech. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what he had to say.
This is my 7th State of the Commonwealth and my last budget address in this job.
A little bit delayed on that clapping there. It was kind of funny. He said what he thought would be a great applause line, and ended up being a little pause there before people realized they're supposed to clap for it. Remind me of that. Was it Jeb Bush moment where he's like, please clap? Like he paused, like, are you guys going to clap? And then finally they're like, oh yeah, we're supposed to clap, 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 clap. So early on, he makes it clear exactly what this is all about, him running for president. But he starts off here talking about, after he establishes that he's going to be running for president, in case anybody's unclear on that, he starts talking about the American dream. I want to play this part for you here. It's about 1 minute, 30 seconds.
Our people, our Commonwealth, and our country are facing serious new challenges, and it's our job to meet this moment. For the first time in my lifetime, a large portion of the American public is questioning one of the most important foundations of our country, the American dream. The American dream is as simple as it is powerful, that if you work hard and play by the rules, you can get ahead. You can build a better life. You can leave your kids better off. For generations now, my family has lived the American dream. My grandfather, who couldn't afford to go to college, worked hard, saved up, and bought the local funeral home. Through that small business, he was able to do what his parents couldn't. He was able to send his kids through college, one to med school, another to law school. And then their children, myself included, had even greater opportunities. But today, too many American families feel this dream is just a hallucination. The cost of groceries and health care are too high. The family vacation they took as kids just doesn't fit in the budget. That first home for a young couple is unaffordable, maybe unattainable. As leaders, we have a responsibility to reignite and refuel the American dream. For the sake of future generations, it must burn bright in the minds of our people.
Nothing says I've lived the American dream of, coming from nothing and becoming something like going all the way back to your grandfather. I'm not saying that Beshear isn't living the American dream. I'm sure it's a dream of a lot of Americans for your dad to become governor and usher you through law school and to hold your hand through being a state house rep, I believe, and then an attorney general, and then governor, of course, and being able to trade on the old family name. That's a dream a lot of Americans have, no doubt about that. But the rag to riches story that people typically attach to the American dream, if you got to go all the way back to your grandfather in order to make that claim, well, then obviously I can say that your rags to riches story doesn't really apply to you. It's not like you led through the struggles. But what's important, though, is he mentions about his grandfather achieving the American dream, and then he mentions that too many Americans today are not able to experience that American dream, able to come from nothing and make something and give something to their kids. He throws in the bit about vacations. He actually said that a few times in the speech, mentioning that going on a vacation is somehow a part of the American dream and ultra important. The government has an interest in making sure that you can go on vacation over the summer breaks. But regardless, I do want to point this out once again. So his grandfather lived that American dream, and he said that for the first time ever, people are thinking they can't achieve it. So this is a first. So he's admitting that in the past, the American dream has existed, but today it's not the case. And I want to ask Beshear a really simple question here, because he's going to go on to talk about all the things government's going to do for people to help them achieve this American dream that people think they can't anymore. Back when his grandfather achieved the American dream, back when people believed in the American dream, if you listen to Beshear saying it, no longer people believe in it, and I get it. There's some stats around that. Did the government, though, do more or less? Was Medicare and Medicaid so widespread, or was there less people on Medicare and Medicaid? Was food stamps such a large program, or was there less people on food stamps? Was government worried about making sure that was there as many hospitals everywhere? Was there such good quality education everywhere as Beshear would say we need more of? More spending, or as Beshear's pushing pre-K for all? Did they have pre-K for all? Did they have a lot of government subsidized housing like he ends up pitching in this? No, they didn't have any of that. They got by the skin of their teeth, but because they didn't have any of that, the government took less from their paychecks, so they were able to do more with the money that they earned. And that's the thing that Beshear won't point out, and that's the thing that many Americans, I think, don't realize is back when the American dream was achievable, if you believe it's not anymore, the government wasn't there to help you achieve it. It was on your own merits completely. The government didn't have nearly as many programs. The government didn't offer all these things. And the more you turn to government to ask them to solve those problems for you, the less achievable the American dream will become. If we're to take Beshear and all the words he said accurate, if you believe what he just said. But that's, of course, that simple idea that government didn't do as much as it does now, and people didn't request government to do as much as it does now. That doesn't stop Beshear from making sure to go ahead and roll out all the things he's going to be doing, all the things he's pushing for in his budget. And so we'll be digging through that. He started off talking about state investments, jobs. If you are waiting for me to mention that, he brought up how Ford laid off, 2,100 people and is closing down that battery plant and refitting it, and they might hire back 2,500, I believe, when they come back into place, whenever that may be, and how that's missing the 5,000 jobs he promised out there. If you think he talked about that, you'd be mistaken. He did not. But he did pat himself on the back an awful lot for private investment. And the things that private individuals ended up getting accomplished. So we'll be discussing that when we come back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We're going through Beshear's State of the Commonwealth address and budget address. And of course, spent a lot of time patting himself on the back. He started off by talking about all the job accomplishments there. And I want you to listen to this 1 minute-ish clip. This is from the address where he starts talking about job numbers, things like that. Go ahead, take a listen.
As leaders, we have a responsibility to reignite and refuel the American dream. For the sake of future generations, it must burn bright in the minds of our people. So tonight, I'm going to discuss the American dream, both where we're succeeding and where we must do more. The American dream starts with a job. It's what supports a family and drives our economy. I'm proud to say that no administration has created more. Last year, we delivered once again, announcing more than $10.5 billion in private sector investment and creating 9,600 new jobs.
So there you go. He lists off these job numbers. Here it is for you to, if you missed it. He says that we've had the best first, second, third, and fifth year of growth under him as governor. But I think we should frame that in. First, you have to understand that Beshear is got a lot of federal dollars flowed into the state, not because he's particularly good at his job or anything like that, but simply put, you had the heavy amount of handouts and cheap loans that went in place during 2020, 2021, and the COVID recovery, as well as the Green New Deal bill that Biden passed that pumped a lot of money into the economy, causing the massive amount of inflation that we will have to discuss as we go through these numbers here in a second, because that really frames them in. So when you consider that, I mean, you got to think in 2022, let's see, that was the highest investment year you've had at $11.2 billion. And you got to think, $3-4 billion of that, $5 billion of that or so came from AESC battery plant and the Ford battery plants that are, they're not really going all that great. So maybe you should back those out of there and then it would be lower. But one thing, though, to point out was he talked about how we've had $10.5 billion this year. Well, in today's money, $10.5 billion was worth, this is why inflation's so important for you to understand, $12.2 billion in 2022. So actually adjusting for inflation, the $10.5 billion adjusted for inflation that we've had this year actually would make this year the best year on record under Beshear. So it makes you wonder, why wouldn't he mention that? Why is he not accounting for inflation? Well, you see, here's the thing. If Beshear starts adjusting his economic investments for inflation, he suddenly doesn't have that top spot anymore. Because you see, the actual record adjusted for inflation since they started keeping track, which is about the early 2000s, was under Matt Bevin in 2017. The state saw $9.2 billion in private industry investments, the thing that Beshear's waving his hands about, talking about, oh, look what I did. Well, that $9.2 billion in investments would be the equivalent of today, $12.8 billion. So adjusting for inflation, Bevin in 2017 had the best year of economic investment on the books. That's why Beshear doesn't want to say, well, adjusted for inflation, this is the best economic year we've had. Because then you might start doing the math on some other governors. And you might start realizing that Beshear hasn't had the best economic record. It was Bevin. And while I understand Bevin had Brady industry issue, we're talking that was what was that, like 10, 12 million? I could be mistaken, but I don't recall Bevin getting the COVID money and the Green New Scam money coming in that gave billions of dollars to Ford and AESC, and us gave them hundreds of millions of dollars as a state in order to facilitate that growth. So he doesn't want you to do the math there. And here's another point where he doesn't want you to do the math. If you listen to what he said that the state has gotten $10.5 billion in private investments and 9,600 new jobs. Now, keep in mind that according to the Economic Development Cabinet search, if you look through their incentives, that the state of Kentucky in just cash and tax incentives handed out near $1 billion in incentives. And if you also add in the industrial revenue bonds and the TIF financing, and those are special financing tools that offer tax incentives to both investors as well as the companies themselves, and it gives them the ability to raise funds much lower than they would have to pay if they were to, go to a private bank, or if they were to sell off stock. They don't want to do that in order to invest and grow their business. So instead, they get these industrial revenue bonds issued. So if you add those in and the TIF financing, along with the $1 billion in handouts, what you end up at is nearly $2 billion of that $10.5 billion in investment was incentivized by our state government. Now, if you do a little bit of math there and you take $2 billion and you divide it by the 9,600 new jobs, that means the state of Kentucky incentivized and gave away over $208,000 per job that was created. We subsidized $208,000 per job that private industry created in Kentucky. That's Beshear's administration's own numbers. No wonder why he doesn't want us doing the math on inflation. He doesn't want us doing any kind of math at all, because if you did the math, you'd realize that his economic growth is only because he's subsidizing it out of your pocket, out of my pocket. This is why I hammer these economic incentives so much. That's why I talk about it so much. It's because they love to pretend like they accomplished something when they get this in, ignoring the fact that they're dumping over $200,000 per job to generate the job. When will we see our money back? Even if somehow, some way, 20% and that's before, by the way, we get into the local incentives and the federal incentives going into this. You add those in, we're probably talking closer to $300,000 to $400,000 a job. And how do we get our money back? If we pretend, let's just use the $208,000 number. If we pretend that the average job created, let's say, paid, around $25, $30 an hour, let's say $60,000 a year. That'd be about right. $60,000 a year, let's say, is what the average job was paying. I think it's a little bit less, but let's say $60K. If somehow we end up getting 20% of their revenue back into the state of their, we're not getting the company revenue. Keep in mind, we've got them special deals. But if we're getting 20% of whatever they're paying that employee back into the state coffers to create those jobs, at $208,000 and then making $60,000 a year, it would take about 16, 17 years for us to get our money back. That's before we break even. That's assuming the jobs stay. And that's assuming, too, we don't continue to hand them more and more incentives, which we do. We'll continue to hand them out more and more money because that's the only way we know how to grow our economy in Kentucky, is for the government to literally pay for almost all of it. So in other words, Beshear's a liar, and he's hoping you don't do the math. There's this interesting image, too, I want to throw up here. When he was talking about jobs, this is for people who can't see it. It shows a picture of him taking a photo with 4 or 5 workers. Looks like it's in a warehouse or maybe a factory or something. And for those who can't see it, the workers are, I'd hesitate to say they're typical Kentuckians. They're obviously of Hispanic descent, which raises the other question when it comes to these jobs. I'm not saying it's impossible that a person that's obviously Hispanic was born in Kentucky, but I think we all know that this means this is imported labor, which leads to the other thing. So we're paying $200,000 a job, and what guarantees do we have that those jobs are actually ending up with Kentuckians? So they're reaching into your pocket. They're taking that $200,000, $208,000 a job. They're handing it out to these private companies. And then who are they hiring? Are they hiring Kentuckians? Are they importing their labor? Are they hiring people not from the U.S., let alone Kentucky? Leads to some questions, to say the least. But that's not the only thing he said on economic development. He had a weird two-side issue when it comes to tariffs and Trump. We'll be discussing that when we get back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Welcome back. Hopefully, if you had an ad break there, radio break, you stayed with us. If you're listening on the podcast version and you didn't get any ad breaks at all, well, lucky you. So here's an interesting moment I want to point out where he does a weird The weirdest swivel attack on Trump. I mean, it's the oddest double-sided talk where he simultaneously decries tariffs while also taking credit for the job creation that I think if we're all very reasonable with ourselves, we could say could be attributed to tariffs. Let's just take a listen to what he had to say, and then we'll discuss.
And despite national headwinds, despite the damages of President Trump's tariff policy that both of our U.S. senators and this governor strongly oppose, Kentucky's economy is still growing. According to a recent Moody's study, most states saw their economy slow and even slide into recession last year. But in Kentucky, we're still expanding, showing our nation what an economy built to last looks like. Take a 10-day window in August, where we welcome more than $6.3 billion in new investment and over 1,000 full-time jobs. 4 iconic companies, GE Appliances, Ford, Apple, and General Matter, all chose Kentucky. On August 11th, GE Appliances announced the investment of $3 billion in new American manufacturing and the creation of 800 new Kentucky jobs. CEO Kevin Nolan shared that when it came to writing the next chapter for GE Appliances, it needed to start in Kentucky. He said, "We're making this commitment because we believe the future of manufacturing is in America and here in Kentucky." We have representatives from GE Appliances with us tonight. Let's thank them for this big investment.
So there you go. He decries the tariffs and then turns around and thanks the 800 jobs that's come over from China, from GE, and then he also thanks Apple as well. Literally, these jobs that they're moving over, the GE was from China. That's where they were manufacturing this before they moved it to America. And then Apple started making all their glass, I believe, in Harrodsburg, Kentucky. They're making a move there. That was also over in Asia, overseas. They're now doing it here. And you know, that's great that we're getting those jobs. Now, on tariffs, you cannot like tariffs. If you're somebody who doesn't like the tariffs, I understand. I don't exactly have a super big opinion on them. I talk about state politics, not federal politics. I see both sides of the issue, if we're to be honest. I see that tariffs end up, honestly, they rise the cost of those goods coming in. They end up getting tariffed, or they end up getting made in America, and they were made over there for a reason, that it was cheaper to make, and now here it's a little bit more expensive to make. And so we end up having to pay for that out of our pocket. That is very true, 100% true. If you're like, no, that's not how, that's just how it works. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing, because at the same time, you can argue that, well, you know what? Paying a little bit more for items to ensure that the manufacturing happens here makes sense. Also, at the same time, if you want to talk about America being competitive on the world stage, and this is the biggest thing that, so I understand it's kind of like it affects the prices of goods and services. But at the same time, I recognize that if America wants to compete on a global stage, well, we have to somehow even it out. I mean, how is an American company with labor laws and minimum wage laws and all these other laws and having to provide benefits at standard supposed to compete, workers' comp, insurances, supposed to compete with some sweatshop over in Thailand that has 5-year-olds sewing together shoes? Even with the shipping costs, it's really hard for Americans to compete on that. And so in a way, I also see tariffs as something that raises the bar, makes us able to compete on a global level, American manufacturers, a little bit better with the American economy. But at the same time, once again, I understand it raises the cost of goods and services. So it's a give and take, and some people can fall on one side. People can think it's a good, people can think it's a bad. It doesn't matter, but it's weird from Beshear, keep in mind trying to run for president, to attack Trump for tariffs and then turn around and thank these same companies who moved their jobs over here because of tariffs. I posted about it online, and a few people were like, they were planning this move a long time. This has nothing to do with it. It obviously does. Even Beshear just announced that it was announced in the summer of last year. Even he says that in his speech, that this is when this was announced. This is when this was official. And you say, well, they've been planning this move for years. Okay, then if they've been planning it for years, why does Beshear get credit for it then? Huh? Why does he even get to talk about it then? Because it wasn't Beshear's policies that they've been planning it for years to move their stuff to America. The Apple Watch glass, they announced they're moving their manufacturing over the next several years to America. This came after the tariffs were put in place. That's clearly because of the tariffs. But, like I said, to claim Trump is awful and then claim accomplishments for his tariffs, it's a weird doublespeak, but that's the way Beshear works. He'll take credit for anything he can. Anything he can. Let's see here. He also, by the way, he never talked about the battery plant, never addressed it, never talked about those jobs lost. See, he took all the credit for all these jobs being created to the tune of $208,000 from taxpayer subsidies, but he never talked about the battery plant and the jobs lost there. But he did talk about housing. He spent about a minute and a half on housing. I've got a video here for you. It's about a minute and a half long, where he's talking about housing. Let's take a listen to that.
Housing in Western and Eastern Kentucky for those impacted by natural disasters. In Western Kentucky, we're building 254 homes for tornado survivors through our relief fund. And I announced the single largest affordable housing investment in our history with $223 million going towards 953 rental units. In Eastern Kentucky, we've embarked on the most ambitious rebuilding effort our country has ever seen through our High Ground initiative. With 8 communities underway, this initiative will eventually bring more than 500 new homes to Eastern Kentucky. 2 sites are already complete: Wayland in Floyd County and the cottages of Thompson Branch in Letcher County. Robbie Williams, the Judge Executive of Floyd County, is here with us tonight. He can share firsthand how a bold housing initiative like our High Grounds can transform a region and its future. Great work is continuing at our other High Ground sites. Homes are springing up at Chestnut Ridge in Knott County and New Hope in Floyd County. And people like Samantha Turner are already moving in at Skyview in Perry County. See, Samantha was volunteering at the Hazard Airport in 2022. She was helping flood victims as they stepped off a National Guard helicopter. In 2025, her home was destroyed by a similar flood. But last year, I got to walk her through her new Kentucky home in Skyview. Now she'll never have to worry when it rains.
So he says he spent $223 million to build 953 rental units. Here he is once again hoping you don't do the math. That's over $200,000 per rental unit. And keep in mind, these are not houses. If they were houses, he would have said houses. Trust me, he would have said houses. He said rental units. These are apartments at over $200,000 an apartment. And they're building them in the areas of Eastern and Western Kentucky where you can buy a house for $200,000, a nice house. Trust me. There are still parts of Kentucky where you can buy a very reasonable couple bedroom, even a couple bathroom house with a yard and everything. You might even be able to get some acreage sometimes, and it won't be run down into the dumps, and you can buy them for $200,000 in certain areas because the demand for it just isn't super high. And he's applauding himself for spending over $200,000 an apartment from the government, over $200,000 an apartment. And a place where you can buy houses for that amount of money. And notice, too, he did this walkthrough with this woman. And notice the house was still in studs. It's interesting he couldn't walk through any finished houses with people, isn't it? He then goes on to promise $150 million more in affordable housing trust. So he's just planning on spending more and more of that money. You know, somehow he thinks that'll make the American dream achievable. I mean, they didn't do it before when the American dream was achievable, but now we're doing it, and we swear it's going to work. When we come back, we'll cover the rest of his speech, going to the end of it there in the final segment. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you are back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, going through Andy Beshear's State of the Commonwealth and budget address that occurred this past week. So we talked about his economic things. He talked about housing things. he started talking about hospitals being built in Louisville and how that's super great because Louisville needed another hospital apparently. And he also talked about, this is one thing he said, he said since he's taken office, the number of mental health professionals have doubled. I know what he's trying to say. I get it. He's trying to claim that mental health issues are like a really, really big issue and people with mental health issues have been underserved. And so we need to get, more mental health professionals. But it's just kind of a funny thing to be like, look, under me, more people are seeing a therapist. I've accomplished a lot. I think it's funny. He also talked about natural disasters. He talked about the people who died in natural disasters. What's weird, though, is while he was talking about that, natural disasters, people that died in it, he didn't do, throughout the speech, he had like a slideshow off to his side. Kind of like if you're watching this, you see I've got a screen off to my side that's running through stuff as I'm talking. He had the same thing. He had a slideshow off to his side where they would show images, clearly images they curated and picked out. So while he's going through talking about the victims, he doesn't show a single image of the victims. Obviously not them, but like a photo, a nice photo, a memorial photo of their names. It'd be a good time to maybe even take a moment to read off those names so they're read into the record when hundreds of people, if not thousands of people are watching, and memorialize those people. But instead of doing that, the slideshow was him in that darn emergency management jacket. It's funny. It reminds me of this scene from The Incredibles. Hold on. Take a listen to this.
Honey?
What?
Where's my super suit?
What?
Where is my super suit?
Put it away.
Where?
Why do you need to know?
I need it.
Don't you think about running off and doing no daring do? We've been planning this dinner for 2 months.
The public is in danger.
My evening's in danger.
You tell me what my suit is, woman.
Honey, where is my emergency jacket? There's been flooding somewhere. People have died. And if I don't get on my emergency jacket, people won't feel like I'm saving them. So, of course, tons of photo ops with that little jacket on. Not one photo of a victim, but, whatever. I guess that's what's really important, right? Him. But anyways, and finally, his kind of final pitch was on pre-K for all. He really, really wants pre-K for all. Let's take a listen here as he goes through that.
The single most effective way we succeed in this next budget is by funding pre-K for all. Right now, more than half of Kentucky's kids are showing up to kindergarten already behind. They come to school with fewer vocabulary words. Some don't know their colors. Others aren't even potty trained. Most Kentucky parents can't afford pre-K. So many of our neighbors want to return to work but simply can't afford childcare. And at a time when things cost too much, pre-K saves parents thousands of dollars every year. And one study shows it boosts parents' earnings by nearly $9,000 per year for at least 6 years. Over time, pre-K is projected to grow Kentucky's workforce by up to 70,000 people. And studies show that for every $1 invested in pre-K, we get $10 cycled through our economy. It's clear, Kentucky needs pre-K for all.
So, first, before we discuss, there's a dystopian nature to what he said there, we'll talk about. But to be honest, there has been several large-scale studies, for example, a large-scale study of Tennessee recently, that show either no or actually negative long-term benefits and detriments to kids when they go through the universal-type pre-K system. It's not hard to imagine why that might be. You might be listening at home thinking, well, kids went to pre-K. Why would that affect them negatively? Well, because they didn't spend as much formative time with their parents. and their parents didn't spend the time teaching with them. And the best teacher for a child is the parent at that age especially. Leading by example, showing them, reading to them, those kinds of things. And instead of talking about how do we encourage parents to do that, what this plan does, and this is the dystopian nature of it that bothers me so much, is that it sends a message, because he talks about how much it will get people back to work. What he's saying is, look, you don't need to raise your kids. Why don't you hand them over to the government? There'll be, 10, 15 kids to a teacher. They can worry about teaching them and taking care of them, and you can go be a cog in the machine. We need more revenue. We need more tax dollars from you. And if you stay home making that dumb old decision of raising your children yourself, what a jerk, then you're not out there making the state that sweet, sweet cash. And that's what we need you doing. We're paying $208,000 a job. You need to get yourself to work so we can cash in off that. Come on. It truly is dystopian in nature to say, hand your kids off to the government. Let us raise them. You go work in a factory or a warehouse or something. Let us handle the kids. Go work at Walmart. That'll be better for your family in the long run, won't it? Not to mention what it does for the state. But also, there was the line there about economic, where he says for every dollar we spend on pre-K, it creates $10. This is something you'll hear a lot of times from people. For every dollar we put in, it'll create $10 of economic movement. That doesn't necessarily mean the state is making anything. It doesn't mean that all that means is that dollar's exchanging hands. So they give $1 to the pre-K person, and then that pre-K person takes that dollar, and maybe they pay a bill with it. Then the company that has that dollar ends up doing, if that was the case, if it's literally like, look, if you'll hear them talk about this, governors and presidents even, well, they'll say for every dollar we put in this, we get $4 back. Well, if those programs really were good in that way and they created all this economic activity, why didn't we give them $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $100 billion? We should literally take a loan out on every single piece of government property, issue all the bonds we possibly can, and just dump it into that program if it's really going to pay off so much. But they're not going to do that, so of course we know that it really isn't all that financially great. And here's the overall point, though. Throughout his entire speech, he promised almost $1 billion in new funding to new pet projects, to new initiatives, to these new things he wants to do. Understand that our last budget was $16 billion in general fund. And we hit a shortfall in our revenues. Our revenues were about $188 million less than it was supposed to be. That forced a 3% agency cut. On top of that, this year, a new income tax rate of 3.5% is taking effect. That will also cost $718 million out of the state's revenues. So just those two things alone, we're at $1 billion less than what we had before. Also, if we want another tax cut, I do, you should, then we're going to have a surplus in the budget of about $700 million. In order to achieve that, we'll need about $500 million more. In a surplus, that means money we can't spend. So if we do the math on this, what we find is that we need to cut about $1.5 billion from our budget. We're not going to be able to accomplish that if Beshear's out here promising $1 billion more in spending and funding. Are we? We got to keep Kentucky fiscally sound, because long after Beshear's gone off to try to earn his spot in D.C., and do I think he'll win the Democrat primary? Probably not. But he may end up on that cabinet if a Democrat wins. So while Beshear's off in D.C., Kentucky will be dealing with the consequences of these actions. Kentucky will be dealing with how he spent our money. We got to claw it back. We got to get it under control now, or we're going to keep paying the consequences long after Beshear is gone. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I thank you all so much for joining me. We'll see you back here next week. Hope you have a great rest of your day.